Oh, yeah!
What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to The Fringe. This morning's video is going to be a little bit different. I wanted to share with you an interview that I had done recently on Maverick Media with none other than Rick Walker, who's also a good friend of the channel. I've made many appearances on Rick's show, but an important topic was discussed. If you tuned into this channel earlier on the weekend, we talked a lot about the corruption of the Calgary woke mayor Jyoti Gondek, essentially canceling out all 70,000 votes of the necessary votes needed to remove her from office in Alberta's recall legislation. We also talked about the effects this may have moving into the federal election. And I thought a lot of good points were discussed in that interview. And for those of you who don't know about Maverick Media or Rick Walker, now's a good time to take it in. I'm going to share with you today the full interview. And if you enjoy what you see, head over to Rumble. You'll see Maverick over there. You'll see Rick Walker over there. He streams daily. He has really great shows and great insights. And again, he's a great friend of the channel. So if you haven't yet followed Rick, make sure to go check that out. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's check out everything that was discussed in that video, as again, I think they're very good talking points as we head into our next election.
Derek, welcome back to the program. Great to have you here.
Hi, Rick. Thanks for having me back. It's always great to stop in and have a discussion with you in open discourse. Happy to be here.
So the focus today is on Calgary politics. A very unusual, I don't know. It's not something that happens every day, an effort to recall a politician. This is just what happened in Calgary with the mayor of Calgary, but it failed. Can you explain to our viewers, first of all, why the municipality determined that this process wasn't valid?
So, from my understanding, Rick, and from what I can see that went on, it's that there was certain information in terms of a paperwork that was needed to be included with a certain number of votes. Now, the number of what they would claim as invalid votes was below 400, and this is a recall petition that essentially amassed over 70,000 signatures, while those signatures still fall far below the required roughly 500,000 signatures needed to recall Jyoti Gondek. What's alarming about the situation is that the mayor essentially used her position of power, so to speak, to ultimately say, well, if those roughly 400 votes are invalid, then that means all 70,000 are invalid. And that really speaks to volunteers who sat out in the cold, who took their time to amass those signatures, get the word out, and push for this lofty campaign.
Yeah, so they basically took a poll of the petition itself to determine if it was likely to be valid, and they found a certain percentage that they said weren't valid. As I was looking at this, they were being pretty technical and pretty picky about what needed to be done on paper for it to be deemed valid. Can you speak to that?
Well, I mean, there's no surprise when it comes to recall legislation. I've often said when criticizing Jason Kenney's introduction of recall legislation that while it's good for voters and while it's good for constituents, there's a lot that needs to be ironed out in terms of the rules or regulations, so to speak, when it comes to recall legislation. Now, it's of no surprise to me when you see corrupt, power-mongering politicians like Jyoti Gondek who work alongside the more labeled left-leaning side of the spectrum that we've seen this kind of abuse of the voting system for quite some time. It doesn't shock me that rather than just accept the numbers, she wants to use her authority to undermine and essentially label the people who sign these petitions as faceless. This speaks volumes to how she, of course, sees the citizens of Calgary, how she views people who are taxpayers in this town, that, of course, their voice essentially means nothing. We see that, I'm not sure if you've been following the blanket upzoning issues that are going on in Calgary right now, but, of course, more than 700 people spoke at a public hearing saying that they don't approve of this process in the city, that while they understand the pitch for more affordable housing, the end of the day, we know that it doesn't go to more affordable housing, but the city, once again, doesn't listen to its constituents. They don't listen to what people have to say. They merely are doing whatever they please. And it raises a lot of questions now going into a federal election for me. Are we going to see this kind of trickery when it comes to Justin Trudeau, Jagmeet Singh? Mainly because we've seen it in U.S. politics. We're now seeing it in municipal politics in Canada. I don't see any other reason why Justin Trudeau would stick around and want to run in another election when his numbers are essentially on the floor.
Yeah, and that really speaks to the underlying cause of all of this. It's the policies. The people are fed up with this constant push for a variety of issues, whether it's affordable housing or even the climate change emergency that was declared there.
Yeah, there's been a lot of bonkers policy declared in Calgary while also uncontrolled spending. And that's also resulted in a barren downtown, offices having to leave. They're overtaxed, they're overcharged. Essentially, when you look at income taxes across the country, people are roughly giving 50% of their income to the government to essentially waste and throw away. Again, when I go back to Justin Trudeau, we've seen his bills, so to speak, or his claims for airplane rides where food has cost excess of $100,000 on a very small trip, we'll say. When you look at the cities now and what they're spending, again, everybody's out of touch. And what this does is it undermines people's encouragement to get involved in the electoral system. It gives people less ambition to vote. I hear it all the time, and it's going to be one of the challenges I face when I run for mayor is actually convincing people that your vote still brings change. We live in a society where people are convinced their vote means nothing. And when you see the corrupt actions of Arrive scam, when you see what's going on with, $8 billion slush funds, and again, municipalities ignoring the votes of people and the requests to remove bad policy, where do people feel that their vote matters? Where do people feel that they can make change? And that's a dangerous precedent we're entering.
Yeah, well, you use the word corruption, and that's on full display in many areas, but I would say the word contempt comes up here as well. They just seem to have absolute contempt for taxpayers when they fly around the world like they're royalty, not public servants.
Well, again, it's a lack of regard for the common person. What government has forgotten, whether it's provincial, municipal, or federal, is that, and I've said it time and time again, they're public servants. They're put here by the Canadian taxpayer, and they're supposed to be representing the best interests of the Canadian taxpayers. I've often said, I miss the days where the government used to just skim a little off the top and we were none the wiser. But as you even stated, they're putting it out on full display these days. They don't even care if they're caught anymore, and there's no consequences. I recently had Conservative MP Garnet Jenness on my channel, and I asked him about Arrive scam and said, we hear all these things about Dalian and GC strategies, and we're obviously spending taxpayer money to run these inquiries. Yet we're not seeing any charges. We're not seeing arrests. We're not seeing anybody facing the music for these billions of dollars of essentially our money that's being funneled into these contempt and out of whack corruption campaigns. So really, what is the point of putting these together if we're not going to see results? And ultimately, he says, well, we just got to get to the bottom of it. At which point I say, we need justice. We need for them to understand that they can't just flaunt these levels of corruption in our face while we just continue to pay our taxes and pay the bills. I've heard many people saying they're not paying their income taxes out of protest this year simply because the government gives it all to the Ukraine. Now, as you said at the beginning of this interview, people are fed up. They're mad. And honestly, even as somebody entering the political realm, I'm very curious where things are going to go, because people talk about things like revolution, and while I never promote those things, I'm wondering if that's where it's going to have to get to before people start seeing results.
Mm. So after going through this process, does the recall process even have any merit, or is this just something that's a facade where the use of technicalities and the complexity of the rules makes it really a useless process overall?
My philosophy on government is always the same. And while I like some politicians, like I've voiced my support for people like Pierre in the past, I do believe that they're the partial solution to the problem that we're in. They're the best of the worst, so to speak, when it comes to what we move forward with in a political system. But the one thing I've always said about government is they're all politicians. It doesn't matter which party they represent. And anytime they've asked for power, anytime they've put any kind of measure in place, it's never to protect the citizens. It's always for some kind of gain on their end, or else they wouldn't be invested in putting those policies forward. When you look at recall legislation, it's a pony show. It's merely put out there to give voters the illusion that they're protected when it comes to selecting their leaders. But when you look at the requirements for said recall legislation, it's an unfathomable and very unreachable number or requirement to make. And as we've seen in Calgary, they can essentially bend the rules to their whim regardless, making it moot and really, again, dismantling the process of electoral results. I don't know where we move forward from here, but I can tell you right now that government has and always will have the best interests in government. And it doesn't seem, at least as of yet, that we're not seeing any that want to represent the people. And that's a big problem.
What was the driving force behind this? The man who got this petition going and started the ball rolling down the hill, is he connected to a political party? Was there some like a partisan aspect to this, or was this just a grassroots organic reaction to the policies that this radical mayor has been implementing?
I think it's a mix of all of those, Rick. I think what you're seeing in Calgary is Landon Johnson, the man who put this together, was, I believe, an owner of an HVAC company. Just like every other Calgarian or Albertan at this point, they're fed up. They've had enough. And I understand the implementation of recall notice. Now, I've been critical of that campaign. I've said that there were better ways to get this out if you wanted to run the gambit of making the signatures. I believe that running this recall legislation, again, a lot of people don't realize that once you put this recall legislation in place, it's a one-off. If it fails to go through, you cannot call recall again on that individual. They're allowed to live out their term. So if you're going to strategize as to how is best suited to get them out, I feel this is a campaign that shouldn't have happened in January. It's one that should have taken place during the summer months in the middle of the Calgary Stampede. And although we see a lot of visitors in Calgary, if you would have set up recall tables for Calgarians outside of the gates of the Stampede, getting signatures, amassing awareness, getting out downtown 17th Avenue during the summer months when everybody's out and around getting, their sunshine in while they can before, again, the smoke hits the city, it would be more effective if you want to actually remove the mayor. I've often said, I feel somebody wanted their 15 minutes, but at the same time, I also side to say I understand the frustration of Calgarians, which is part of the reason I'm running for office. And when you hear about the connections to, Take Back Alberta and all these other outlets that wanted to join with Landon Johnson, well, those things didn't happen until about the halfway mark, as far as I'm aware. I could be wrong, but a lot of noise about this recall legislation didn't really get rolling until a good portion of the way into the time limit in order to amass those signatures. And that was a huge misstep, a huge problem. I think if you were going to be effective again in trying to secure those roughly 480,000 signatures, this should have been planned. It should have been strategized. It should have been done over social media, build up groups, get awareness out that we're going to start a recall, rather than just putting the paperwork through on the risk of a one-off. I just feel there's better steps that could have taken place. And where it came from, again, there's a lot of missing information, but no matter who it came from or who was connected to it, I feel that there was a massive failure in terms of the organization, although we got a very good push from volunteers and concerned citizens toward the half to three-quarter mark. And I think we really could have made a dent. But again, you see how Jody took those results, made them invalid. I feel that even if we amassed those signatures, as I stated earlier, it's a pony show. They would have found any means necessary to avoid any kind of a bylaw election or recall. And I think we'd still be where we are right now.
Yeah, strategy absolutely critical, especially when you have a monumental task in front of you to collect over 500,000 signatures to make this thing valid and make sure that it's done in a way that complies with the law or the rules. So that's very difficult. One of the issues that I noticed that came up was what happens to those signatures after they're collected Is privacy being protected? Are political parties able to get a hold of this list? And is that a concern?
I would think so. When you look at the Freedom Convoy, which I don't think we're ever going to see a grassroots uprising to the level of what we saw during that time ever again, or at least in the near future. When you look at the frozen bank accounts, when you look at people who were essentially given no options to pay their bills simply for donating as little increments as $10 to the Freedom Convoy, if you think that the city of Calgary doesn't take those lists, that doesn't look at every name on that list with their address, their email information, and all of a sudden say, we know now who was against Jody Gondek, we know who was against the machine, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I looked at it as, I didn't think the recall was going to go through to begin with. Again, from a strategic standpoint, a lot of people asked me, why did you announce your race for mayor so early? There is a lot of planning that goes into place. There is a lot of strategizing, getting people together, trying to communicate how do we best and effectively get this out in order to make a dent. And that's where my skepticism was. However, I said, as someone running for mayor, those numbers will tell me how many people are ready to get out and vote. It'll tell me how many people are truly fed up and where we can start making some headway on the work for this upcoming campaign. When it comes to, though, the machine of installed mayors, and again, I sit on the fence that I believe Jody Gondek was installed, whether people want to call that conspiracy or not. I find it very withholding that, a representative for the city who was dragging behind in the polls, suddenly at the 11th hour took a massive boost in votes, 175,000 people out of a city of 1.7 million to secure the seat as mayor really doesn't take a lot when it comes to voters. But it really speaks to hands in the background making things move around, that it does make me question if people are at vulnerability of being doxxed, if people are going to see some form of pushback from the city. Again, not in a physical form, but more making their lives difficult moving forward. Your guess is as good as mine as to what that means, but I guarantee you they've got that data and they're looking over it as we speak.
Absolutely. I mean, if your name appears on that petition and then you apply for a job with the municipality in any department, it might not to work to your advantage. That's for sure. When is the next municipal election?
So it's slated for October of 2025. Again, people have asked, how do I get involved with your campaign? How do I donate? Unfortunately, I can't sign up for that campaign to even get my name on the ballot until January 1st of next year. 2025, when you look at our upcoming federal election and then a municipal election in Calgary, it's going to be a heck of a year for politics. It's going to be a crazy year in terms of what gets thrown out, what goes back and forth. And again, even when we look at what's coming up federally, I've said multiple times, I think when you look at the current budget, when you look at Jagmeet Singh's support of the budget, the attacks that are going on back and forth now, it's kind of like a hydra to the point where they're going to start eating their own heads. And I think it's going to get a little bumpier before it starts getting better. And even after we see a change in government, whether that be municipality, federally, or provincially for anybody, there's going to be a lot worse things to come our way, I feel, before things get better.
Now, I'm seeing that in Alberta, they're going to allow for at least one election the use of political parties at the municipal level. So this is something of an experiment that will have potentially an impact nationally across the country, depending on how this goes. How do you see this playing out? And or do you think it's a good thing, a bad thing? Any opinion?
It's never a good thing to say where you stand politically. And the reason I say that when it comes to municipalities is that municipal level is the policies that mostly affect somebody's life in terms of their property taxes, their bylaws, their services, what they're paying into, what they're getting back, more so than provincially or federally. Now, I think the problem in introducing political parties is desperation for those who are losing their grip on identification, so to speak, as to where they stand, to bring in those Gen Z voters, the teachers, the doctors, the union workers that usually support certain parties. It's a grab at straws, a desperate straw grab to try to say policy shouldn't matter. It's who I stand behind. It's who I represent. When you're running for city council, like people have asked me, where do your political alliances sit? There's 1.7 million people in this city. I have to look after 1.7 million people. Any policy I put forward has to have those bosses' interests at heart, not those that are funneling money in through businesses, through scandals, through arrangements, backdoor deals. Again, public servant has to reign true. And when you bring in political labels, political parties, it does nothing more than make municipal elections a business, so to speak. And I think it's going to cause a lot of upset and a lot of chaos in the electoral
It's interesting
system.
you use that word business, because at the municipal level, you don't have, it's not like a parliamentary system per se. So to use a party system like that, it seems to me you're just kind of layering on top a fundraising machine. Has anyone even looked at the way that system would be affected, or how the fundraising aspects of this would come into play at the municipal level if you're using party politics?
I think the reason you'll never see that is the same reason we never see Justin Trudeau in handcuffs for his multiple scandals. Again, it's become a business, and there's too many higher up elite type individuals involved in the background that it would destroy their profits, it would destroy their ideals, it would destroy their future. I've often said, when you look at politicians, if you look like Jagmeet Singh, if you look at Justin Trudeau, even Pierre, these guys kind of remind me of the old NASCAR drivers, where they could come out in their suits and have all of their representatives branded on their clothing as to who they're backing, who they support. We've seen with Jagmeet Singh, his brother works for Metro Inc., and of course, Jagmeet always goes against Loblaws anytime he's talking about corrupt CEOs, and that's merely out of a conflict of interest because he's trying to help out his brother and going after people that aren't involved with Metro Inc. It's policy and politics are now sponsored. It's now who lines my pockets the best. Again, I don't want to keep going back to my campaign because that's not the focus of this interview, but part of the reason I decided to run is I'm a citizen. I'm not lined by anybody's pockets. And while that makes my bid for mayor so much more difficult, I'm willing to run on the merits again of what's involved for the city rather than who's giving me a bonus or a kickback in order to bend the laws to fit their narrative. And that's going to be a huge problem, again, moving forward, that we need more representatives. I've said often, whether you want to run provincially as an MLA, as a school board trustee, if you feel you have good ideas, now's the time to step up, to make that change, to actually do something to benefit this country. Because the more people we get involved in politics to start saying, this is corruption at its finest, it's paid government, we need to get away from that, then people are going to start to see the light. Hopefully people can then start realizing that their vote does carry weight, that they can make change. But it takes a group of like-minded people in order to push that kind of policy forward.
All right. Do you think that progress is being made? Are the people winning after, 3+4 years of this kind of government overreach that we've been living through?
Yes and no. I think that the people involved have passion. They love their country. They love everything about Canada. No matter where you live in the country, I think that people's hearts are in the right places. I've often said that, during lockdowns, I always felt like Canada had abandoned its principles, that the term Canadian just didn't apply anymore when it came to people's good nature or goodwill. However, when I turned on the TV and seen trucks going through Winnipeg, Manitoba, out in Headingley, it's like I was reminded, when you saw all the Canadians on the overpasses, the signs, the trucks blaring through, the kids on CB radio saying, thank you for standing up for our freedoms. That was Canada. That's where we're at. And it showed that there are more people than you think that are concerned about this country, that are concerned about the future. The problem I see, even as a YouTube content creator, is multiple comment sections. Nothing's going to happen. My vote doesn't matter. I don't see the point. You can't vote your way out of corruption. Those are the kind of ideologies that, again, I understand people's dismay. I understand that people are tired. They're drained because politics seems to be an everyday conversation now. I was always told as a child, money, politics, and religion are the three things you don't talk about. But when you go anywhere now, everybody's talking politics. I get that aspect of it, but what people have to realize is that we need more people to speak up. We need more people to get active. So if we're going to make change, we have to stick to our principles. We have to stick to our guns. We have to learn to say no, because that's one thing I found that we've let go of in the last 20 years. We're trying to appease everybody. We're trying to be politically correct on everything and make people happy. We have to start having the ability to say, not anymore, and we're going to stay in our numbers until we see change.
Right. And you're seeing axe the tax protests, frustration out there. People are fed up with the carbon tax. They're fed up with this. I think this capital gains tax is going to have unintended consequences. We're already seeing that. We're seeing people put cottages up for sale right now. There's a flood of that happening as a result of this capital gains tax increase that is coming. Do you think Justin Trudeau is just out of touch? Because here he is still running, and he has to be the most unpopular, most hated public official, politician in Canadian history, in my estimation. What are your thoughts?
Well, when it comes to Justin Trudeau, I hear people say a lot, this guy's an idiot, he's a moron. I always say, I think he's smarter than you think he is. He's just playing the buffoon on television. He's got a lot of people in the background pulling the strings. When it comes to capital gains taxes, I stand on the fence that the boomer generation, the baby boomer generation of the 1950s, they've done their time. They've invested their money. They've been through the 80s plummet of Trudeau's senior. I think that they've earned the right to retire. They've earned the right to hang on to the money they've worked so hard for, and that they've gained any kind of money off of in terms of their financial investments, their stocks, their portfolios, in terms of property. Justin Trudeau has just spent and printed so much money and caused such rapid inflation that he doesn't want to give up his golden throne, and he wants to continue to spend. So rather than admit there's a spending problem or back down on policy, we've seen all these new lunch programs announced, home building that are essentially photo ops, constant program after program after program rolling out with no money to pay for those things because we're giving all of our money to forever wars. I think what needs to happen is that people, again, need to push back and realize that this man just wants our money to continue his lavish, rich spending. When you hear, but I'll say there's another side to that coin, because a lot of people I hear, again, I'll flat out say I support Pierre Poilievre, but people jump all over my back when I question, you hear axe the tax, you hear we're going to build the homes, we're going to stop the crime. I don't doubt those things, but what a lot of people who have rose-colored glasses don't realize when upholding Pierre Poilievre is somehow we have to pay for all of that. We have to pay for the large deficits. We have to pay for all the spending that's gone on since Justin Trudeau took office. Don't forget, this man has spent more money than all other prime ministers combined and racked up an unfathomable deficit. You can reduce income taxes, you can cut the carbon tax. The problem in the end is that we have to pay the piper somewhere. The money has to come from somewhere. It's going to be interesting to see how Pierre does that. I'm not necessarily saying that Pierre's lying. I just think that Canadians may be in for tax in form of another purpose than carbon tax. Will it affect our food? Will it affect our gas? Certainly not as much as the carbon tax currently does. We might see an increase in GST. We might see more provinces encourage, provincial sales taxes. I'm not sure where it's going to go, but there's no real win at this point until we see results. And that's where, again, I've put my horse in the race with Pierre, but until I see action, until I see the actual pen to paper policy adopted, I'm going to remain skeptical until we get to that point. But I still believe Pierre should be the next Prime Minister of Canada.
Yeah, well, that's the challenge for the Conservatives. The Liberals and the NDP get to have a giant party and spend everybody's money, and then you get the adults back in the room and elect a Conservative government. They have to clean up the mess, right?
No.
So they have the tough job in the end. What are the issues that you see moving forward as you begin to plan your campaign and take your run at the mayor's chair?
Yeah, the biggest issue, anytime I've spoken to people about my policies essentially are to lower property taxes. They're to lower business tax, essentially to nothing. Now, again, the money has to come from somewhere. So where do we do that? I want to cancel all the wasteful spending. I want to cancel overstaffing of city jobs that are unnecessary, studies that are being done that are unnecessary, NGOs or non-government entities that are being funded millions and millions of dollars each year for nothing, essentially. And using that money to encourage business to come back to Calgary, encourage people that Calgary is an affordable place to live. We have to work for the people while still committing to infrastructure and growth. The biggest uphill challenge is going to be, again, fighting that machine and convincing 1.7, well, not 1.7 million, not everybody can vote in the city, but those of the 1.7 million that are eligible to vote, to get out, to actually vote, to make a difference. Again, Jody Gondek took her seat with 175,000 votes. That's minuscule in comparison to what should be voting out there. And if we want change, it's going to take a lot of volunteers. It's going to take a lot of capital. It's going to take a lot of work and planning to get door knockers, to get people out there saying it's time for a change. We'd rather have somebody who's, a citizen who's looking out for the rights of citizens rather than a pig at a trough, so to speak, taking up all the benefits. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be an interesting race, and it's one that I'm very skeptical as to where the results are going to end up. However, I'd rather push back and attempt to do something than sit in my basement, make YouTube videos, and do nothing at all. So it'll be interesting to see where that election goes, and hopefully we can make a dent and make a difference. If not, at least get the word out that change is necessary.
And then back to this, federal election that has to happen at some point. Any predictions on when we might see people go to the polls?
I don't think it's going to happen until 2025. And again, you see Justin Trudeau trying to extend those dates, but in order for people to secure pensions, they virtue signal that it's because of religious holidays. It has nothing to do with that. And in fact, when it comes to that election, I talk about trickery or messing with tabulations that you saw in the United States in the last election. My concerns ride again as to, the devil could be right in front of us announcing his plan. And what I mean by that is, why is Justin Trudeau running when his own party has said he should step down, when the statistics aren't in his favor? Jagmeet Singh doesn't want to call an election no matter what, because while many people say it's because of his pension that, he's done, he wants out, he just wants his payday. I'm skeptical. You look at the polls right now, Pierre Poilievre has such an incredible lead over both of those parties. However, if we're not going to see something similar to what happened in Calgary just now, I think people need to wake up and realize that, again, this man may be flaunting his plans right in front of our faces. We may see a possibility of a corrupt version of Trudeau attempting to hold power in the next federal election. I sure hope not. I hope that, it's a free and fair election. I have to put my faith in humanity to say that, I hope for the best. But after 8 years of this prime minister locking us up, twisting laws, scandal, it's tough to have faith that things are going to work the way they're supposed to.
Yeah, I keep saying don't count him out, even though the polls are the way they are, and Poilievre is so far in front. Politics, man, so much can change so quickly, and
Absolutely.
he must have a plan. He must have wedge issues that he's planning to use to divide people the way he did in the last election. Division, that's been, the strategy for him all along. Get people really upset, cement his base, some support, and firm that up with anger and fear. That's what I see him doing. And, man, I don't know. If you're talking, maybe even the fall of 2025 for the next election, we have another year and a half to go. That's an eternity in politics.
And the destruction that can be done between now and then is unfathomable. My old man always used to say, don't count nothing until it's finished. Get it in writing, and once it's signed, then you have a deal. I think it's the same with this election. Until they close the polls, until they count and tabulate the votes, and until they declare a definitive winner, it's anybody's game as far as I'm concerned. The trickery is afoot, and people just need to be vigilant, keep their eyes open, and make sure to exercise their democratic rights and vote. I know people think it doesn't matter, but if there's one thing I can't stress enough, if you lived in another country without a democracy, without the ability to go and vote, you would miss that ability very quickly. This is our voice. We have to exercise it. We have to use it. It's part of our due diligence as a Canadian citizen. So make sure you get out there, you vote, you speak your mind, and you're heard.
Okay. Derek, is there anything else you'd like to add today or think that we might be missing?
No, I mean, look, again, corruption's everywhere. I think, again, groups need to get together, band together. You need to get online, start voicing your concerns. Don't worry so much about censorship. Don't worry about being filtered out. There are more people, again, if we talk back to the convoy days, more than you know that are in this boat that agree with you, that agree with your policies. Jordan Peterson once told me the best way you can make change is by getting involved in like-minded groups. And I think that's what's necessary moving forward. I think Canadians need to stay strong. They need to stay positive. Even in these dark times, we have to remember it's always darkest before the dawn, and hopefully the dawn's coming sooner than later, but time's going to tell, like I said, until we see a signature on paper. We just got to be vigilant and stay strong.
And just one last thing. How can people find you, get in touch with you?
Well, people can find me over on YouTube, of course. I have my main channel, Unacceptable Fringe. I'm posting videos there 7 days a week. People can always come check out. We do live streams every week as well. They can find me on Twitter at UnacceptFringe. I'm not as active on Twitter as I used to be, just because it's such a weird platform. You essentially have to pay to play these days in order to be on there, and I kind of strive back anytime a company asks for my money in order to stay relevant. But people can find me on Twitter. They can find me on YouTube. They can chat with me during my live streams. And again, we have another book coming out, hopefully by summer, a spoof from good old Dr. Seuss of Green Eggs and Ham called Just Axe the Tax. So I'm looking forward to that one. I think it's going to be a good one. Probably going to be our last one for the indefinite future. Again, with this mayoral campaign coming up, the time to put those together is going to be rough. So hopefully, again, we can sit down and chat when that comes out. But I'm looking forward to dropping that on people, hopefully, again, this summer.
Yeah, that'll be great. I look forward to that conversation and to the new book. So thank you, Derek, for joining us on the program today.
Great. Thanks for having me, Rick. Always happy to stop by.